Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce my guest, Devi Snively. Before I do that, I just wanted to remind people, if you hadn't heard already, that I'm going to be joining Simon Bamford, Barbie Wilde, and Doug Bradley in Atlanta at the end of January, 25th to the 27th of January at Days of the Dead in Atlanta, along with a whole load, and they just started announcing other guests as well. So hopefully I shall see a few of you there. Yeah, that is all I have to shout out. Congratulations to everyone who's at New York City Horror Film Festival, where Book of Monsters showed to a sellout audience yesterday. So thank you to everyone who supported that so very, very much. Cool. All right. Hi, Devi. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing very good. Thank you very much. So thank you very much indeed for joining me. And we're going to be talking about Frankenstein. And I know you were telling me earlier on that you have been talking about that a lot this year. But before we get into that, you also mentioned that you've just been involved, or just set up a new website, Beyond Bechdel?
Beyond the Bechdel, yes.
Beyond the Bechdel. Okay, tell me about that, please.
Well, like you guys over in the UK, we've been having a challenging time with some issues of social justice, not quite where we'd like them to be. So everybody wants to, do their part. And my big topic in life and cause is feminism. So an old friend from my Sarah Lawrence days and I, we've been discussing feminism in film for decades now. So we decided to put that conversation on the internet, and we're inviting other underrepresented voices, not just women, to join the discussion about what's going on and how did we get to a place where this joke from an underground comic in the 80s, the Bechdel test, from Dykes to Watch Out For by Alison Bechdel, has now become a world's lowest litmus test ever, that we have to find ways to get women to actually be able to speak about anything other than men to each other in a movie. So we're looking at how did we get here and how do we get out of here? And we'll be interviewing all sorts of different filmmakers and storytellers and feminists, male, female, and otherwise. So hopefully people will check that out and join the discussion.
And how many episodes have you done so far?
We just literally launched. And as we were talking about earlier, I'm kind of a neo-Luddite. So our PR person isn't even coming on till January. So we're kind of not really on social media that much right now. But that's going to really kick off more in January. But there's some introductory blog entries about feminism and the film industry where we're at now, and a few film reviews looking at the feminist gaze through that lens. So it's a good place to get a little primer, and then when people want to jump in, we'll have that in January.
Right. And so you've already set up a website, though, is that right?
Yeah, it's up and running. We post on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're talking over each other. Sorry. It's www.beyondthebechdel.com.
Okay, beyondthebechdel.com. Okay, cool. All right, so check that out, folks. I'll make sure there's a link to that in the. I'm linking myself a little note. I shall type whilst we speak. Beyondthebechdel.com. Beyondthebechdel.com. Okay, cool. So. As I say, thank you so much for joining me to talk about Frankenstein. Do you remember when you first came across? Did you come across a film first, or did you come across the book, or how did you first learn about the story of Frankenstein?
Actually, I was probably about 3 years old, and I lived in this, modest little, we had our humble days in our family. We lived in this block where all the kids got together, young and old, and we were going to put on a haunted house. And so my older brother tells me, I know, you can be the Bride of Frankenstein. I'm like, what's the Bride of Frankenstein? And then they told me, about these people made from dead bodies, and I was going to be the bride and have to marry that, and I was made from dead bodies. And of course I cried, and the haunted house never happened. I thought that was terrible. Little did I know Little did I know I would become obsessed with this story and make kind of part of my career about it.
Right. Okay, so after that, when was it in college or?
Well, I think I actually didn't read the book until much later in my adulthood. Like a lot of people, I saw the old Universal monster movies. In fact, I think the first one I saw was Abbott and Costello, and I was still really young, and it's actually scared me, which is embarrassing to admit now. But yeah, I didn't read it till I was an adult, and I was so shocked to find out that all of these ideas that most of us have, because most people, I mean, you can say the word Frankenstein anywhere on the planet, and chances are people will have some idea, but the majority of those people actually haven't read the novel, which is a shame because it's genius. It's a genius novel. So yeah, it wasn't until like a decade or so ago that I finally read the book and was just blown away by how intelligent and ahead of its time and relevant it still is.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so it is literally within the last decade or so. And what for you makes it so important? Why do you think it's so important? You said, you know, everyone knows it's around the world. Why do you think it's so important?
I think because it asks the most timeless and timely question of all: what does it mean to be human? And I think that's at the core of all horror. I think that's at the core of all storytelling. I think that's at the core of humanity. What does it mean to be human? And she tackles it in such a Mary Shelley tackles that question in such a profound and moving and tragic way that that's why it continues to be so relevant, because all of the meaning has not changed at all.
It's interesting because I've always loved the subtitle, or the Modern Prometheus. You know, there is, it covers so many topics, doesn't it? It talks about scientific inquiry, and you know, you can bring that up to genetics and creation of new forms of life by splicing DNA. You know, it is man literally in this instance playing God. It covers all, and it's just really fascinatingly and beautifully written as well, and also quite horrifying. You know, horrifying in terms of the descriptions of the creature when it first arrives, and also I love the fact that Frankenstein is revolted by his creation. And the quotation from Milton's Paradise Lost at the very, very beginning of the book, which I'm not going to try and quote off the top of my head because I completely forgot it. But basically, you know, I did not ask to be made from clay. You know, I did not ask to be created. Why did you do that? Which is the question of the creature. Now, you've made a short film, Bride of Frankie, which I'll talk about in a few moments, and you've chosen a couple of other reinterpretations. What are the other, which are the book and the Bride of Frankenstein? Do you, apart from that, you said it was the Universal, it'll have been the Boris Karloff one that you think you saw first? Is that?
Yeah, I think it was, well, actually, I think the very first one was Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, which is really absurdly ridiculous because I was a big Abbott and Costello fan growing up. So, and like I said, that scared me. And you know, we look at these things now and think they're kind of quaint compared to the horrors that we see not only at the movie theater, but, you know, on the nightly news, unfortunately. But they really were scary when they came out. People were terrified. If you look at the old trailers for Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, they're really created to inspire fear and think of the creatures. I always refer to him as the creature, as monsters. And there's no question in the trailers who the good guys are and the bad guys are, unlike the movies, unlike the book. So when we think about that now, and we look at it and we're like, oh, this is really quaint and funny and campy, and we know much more about it because there's been so much discussion about it. But yeah, when I was little, I don't remember when I saw the original Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, but it was a very different experience than watching it now, where I look at all the subtext and what was going on with the Hays Code and how they got past the censors. And, you know, it's just so rich and deep. So that's why I think it's such a great tribute to Mary Shelley, even though it's not what you'd call faithful to the book in any way, shape, or form. It does touch upon a lot of the key themes and questions, and gets away with stuff just like she got away with stuff by not having her name on the book when it first came out. You know, because a woman, it was bad enough writing a book like this that was so shocking to the world at that time in 1818, but then to have it be by a woman, and not just any woman, but Mary Shelley, who, you know, was very, very scandalous because of her parents. Her mom was, a lot of people call Mary Wollstonecraft the first feminist. And Mary Shelley was very much following in her footsteps. So to find out she wrote this shocking book was just too much for the public.
Yeah, because I mean, basically she was, you know, she'd started an affair with her husband, her eventual husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, when he was married and she was 17 years old. So yeah, she was his second wife. And yeah, and obviously very not the sort of thing that was done in those days. I've just been doing some research on it, and the different hands that are involved in the manuscript. She obviously worked quite closely with Percy Bysshe Shelley on the creation of the book. What do you think of the controversy? I know back in 2007, there was a book published, The Man Who Wrote Frankenstein.
That makes me so angry. And, you know, if you look at the opening, at the preface in both, the introduction in both versions of the book, because there was, of course, the 1818 and then was the 1831 when she did kind of a toned down version. I haven't even read that because I don't want to read the censored version. But she very much defers to Percy. And, you know, oh, it's because of his support and all of that. But no evidence suggests that. Even in the writing style, I don't think, I mean, you know, she and he and Byron and all these friends gathered that one night. You know, they made a dare, they're going to write ghost stories. And only she and what's his name, Polidori, who did the vampire kind of Dracula precedent book, they were the only two that finished their projects. These other guys were kind of slackers who gave up, you know, they were doing their drugs, they were having fun. Okay, the reign's over, we are not going to finish our projects now. I think that's a very sexist, horrible attitude to just assume she didn't do it. And in fact, especially in a history where so many men get the credit for things that women did. So I think we should give her the benefit of the doubt. She went on and wrote many novels even after he died. And obviously he wasn't assisting her there. And granted, they didn't have the same impact. And in fact, I'm ashamed to say I haven't read them, but I've been at all these Frankenstein conferences with some of the top Mary Shelley scholars in the world talking about how wonderful they are. So I avoided them because I heard bad things. And I'm thinking, my gosh, I'm perpetuating the problem. This is exactly what's been going on. This is a woman with a lot to say at age 19. Of course, she had more to say as she got older. So yeah, I think that's bunk. Yeah,
it's interesting. There is a website, the Shelley Godwin archive, where they've published the manuscripts of the different, because we don't have the original story as such. But I was looking at, and it's a preponderance. It's her handwriting. It's really obvious he helped her with editing, and he made notes, and there are comments, and there's definitely a backwards and forwards. But I love what I think the premise of the gentleman who wrote the book in 2007 is the fact that it's her handwriting doesn't matter. She was obviously taking dictation, and it's just like, you think, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. You know, no one can. Yeah. What Shelley couldn't actually bother to lift the quill himself to write. No, that doesn't make sense. I think it's really interesting, and I'm always fascinated by the manuscripts of famous books. Looking at the stage play of Dracula by Bram Stoker is really a fascinating thing. It's in the British Library and has been displayed. And you can see where he's literally cut out speeches from the original novel and pasted them into his stage play, which is a very sensible way of doing, translating your work for stage. Okay, so I think it's a wonderful book. You, as I say, you've done, how many short films have you made? You seem to have made an awful lot of short films.
Yeah, I have. I don't even know. And then they're the ones I'll admit to and the ones I won't. But we all have those, right? Yeah, I don't know, maybe 9.
Because you very kindly sent me some links, and because I hadn't realized that I had seen one of my favorites of yours is Death in Charge. Which when I watched it again this evening, I thought I have seen this before, and realized you'd actually sent me a DVD of it when we first met a few years ago, which I really, really enjoyed. And there's one from 2010 called Death, Last Seen on Dolores Street.
Correct. Yeah, my foray into the noir horror zone.
It's absolutely beautiful. I've not seen it. And it features Eileen Dietz in name.
A mistake, actually. That's kind of funny. For the wanted poster, or the missing posters, there are 2 of them. It was supposed to be the actress's name who appeared in the movie, but in fact, the guy who did the artwork and I had been talking, and we had just been at an event where Eileen Dietz was, and I think he'd met both actresses, and he accidentally put her name instead of Greba. It was supposed to be Eileen Greba. So I felt kind of bad, but at the same time, I liked the horror aspect that just accidentally came into our movie. So we're like, oh, that's cool. We'll keep it.
It's fun. It's fun. It really is good fun. And as I say, Death in Charge is another one which I really, of yours that I really enjoy. But let's talk about Bride of Frankie. How did that come about?
I've wanted to do that story for a long time for probably 2 reasons. One, after reading the novel, I realized that, there have been literally hundreds of movies inspired by the Frankenstein story. And I've seen about 80 of them, and not a single one, with the ironic exception of Frankenhooker, that captures the feminist voices in the book. I thought, this is really messed up. So I wanted to address Shelley's feminism and some of the points that I felt have been overlooked from her original novel in the cinematic realm. Plus, in James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein, there's that part with Dr. Pretorius, and he brings out all the homunculi. Mm-hmm. And in one of them, there's a ballerina, and he puts a ballerina in a jar. And my dog just jumped up. And as a former ballerina, the idea of being a ballerina in a jar disturbed me to no end. So I'm like, I need to get that homunculus out of the fucking jar. So for that reason, I created those 2 reasons brought together Bride of Frankie. So now I guess I spoiled it. Spoiler alert, the homunculus gets out of the jar at last. And the female voices rise above and triumph.
The male voices. And so when did you make it?
We shot it in 2016, that summer, knowing that we'd take about a year to do post, because we got some wonderful people on board who knew it was a passion project on a low budget. So everyone had their paying gigs, and I'm like, look, if we give you a whole year, would you be willing to do it for less money? And they were kindly. So it took us a year of post. But yeah, now I've been traveling the last 18 months around the world to the festivals and stuff, which has been amazing.
Oh, right. Okay. So how many festivals, can you remember how many festivals off the top of the head it's screened at?
Over 180.
Wow.
Yeah, across 36 different countries. So it's getting around.
That's extraordinary. So how long has it been on the festival circuit then? Is it literally the year it's been on?
Yeah, it's about to be 2 years. It's about to be 2 years.
Wow.
And we just found out we got into another festival in January. So it's going to have over a 2-year run, although we have accepted a distribution deal. We're just working out some final stuff with the music rights. So. Really
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, did you shoot it? You shot on video?
Yes, HD, the Alexa.
Right. Because you beautifully done, and the quality of the black and white is really beautiful. And where did you film it?
We shot it in South Bend, Indiana, where my partner and I both sometimes teach at the University of Notre Dame. So we have a lot of connections there, spend time there. And the whole community came out. That location that we got is an old 1800s mansion that they just donated for free. So, and then we had a fabulous production designer, Elena Moore, out of Chicago, who got everything on that set was either from the 1930s or earlier, or created from materials that would have been around to replicate it. So it was very period piece authentic, because the story takes place in the 30s. So yeah, we got a lot of bang for our buck.
You really did, and it's a fun piece, very definitely a fun piece. You said you watched over 80 versions of Frankenstein, apart from the 2 that you've chosen, and we'll come back to Frankenhooker a little later on. What are your other favorites?
Well, I like different ones for different reasons. I mean, I thought the Hammer films were really very fun and interesting. I don't think of them as really Frankenstein stories, though. They're so different from Mary Shelley's work, and oftentimes I would say even antithetical to them. They really, well, I think most of the films, the problem is they really run with Victor's narcissism, but almost, lionize him, which I don't agree with. I've always contended that, he's meant to be an unreliable narrator as it is, and that Mary Shelley has probably a similar opinion that I do. He's the narrator, so obviously he is telling it in his favor, like, oh, I'm the poor victim. But I think, he's just a narcissistic prick, frankly.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, Doug Bradley spoke about the Peter Cushing, Victor Frankenstein. And I think it's really interesting that they play up to the fact that he basically almost hypnotizes young doctors into continuing, every time he gets caught, and for whatever reason, he's always got they're very, very simple plot lines, it's more or less the same story again and again and again. Victor Frankenstein tries to create a man from bits and pieces with the help of a good-looking young assistant, and he just kind of hypnotizes these young men into supporting him. But as Doug says, watching the Peter Cushing, the Victor Frankenstein over the films, the development, as you say, he's a narcissistic prick. There is no two ways about it. It's extraordinary. But yeah, no, I like those as well. Any others off the top of your head?
I can think of a lot of ones I hate. Well, here's an interesting one where I have a love-hate relationship with it. I saw, and I guess I don't know if you can call it a movie per se, because it was a Danny Boyle directed play, but I saw it filmed. Nice. And it comes here every year, and I've seen both versions because it's Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller switching roles every night, which is just such a feat, and it's really powerful. I have a lot of problems with the script. I think the women characters are dreadful. I mean, they're just painted as these passive, as they so often are in Frankenstein stories. They're either victims or just completely passive dolts who do nothing. Hence passive. Nice, redundant. Okay. But, and so I did have issues with that. And I thought, again, the Victor character was very cartoon villainy. I thought Benedict Cumberbatch did a really nice job of adding dimension. Just his acting is so great, but overall it still felt kind of cartoony to me. And yet, they included the scene with the family and the house, and the evolution of the creature, I think at the beginning is really in the womb. It's such an interesting interpretation that I think it was a lot more faithful on a plot level than a lot of the stories have been. I just feel like it still missed a lot of the nuances of the themes and emotions and the question, you know, what's it mean to be human? Because I think everybody loses their humanity in a kind of abrupt way by the ending.
Interesting. I've not seen it. I started reading the play, and got about a third of the way in, and I think put it down. Didn't bother to pick it up again because it just didn't grip me. I think
no, the story is the weakest part. It's really a spectacle, though. I mean, just watching it and the performances, especially. And no offense to Johnny Lee Miller, but I think he was a bit more surface. In both roles, Victor and the creature, Benedict Cumberbatch was just remarkable. There was just such a depth, and you just knew he read this novel and he really, really got it.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating is they have a making of at the beginning, and they showed the two actors how they approached the role of the creature. I thought it was really interesting that Johnny Lee Miller looked at his toddler son and borrowed from that, whereas Benedict Cumberbatch, is it Cumberbatch or Cumberbatch? I hear we Americans don't know how to pronounce. I'm sorry?
Cumberbatch.
Okay, I was right. But anyhow, he went, cool, that sounds better. It sounds more British to me, which is always a good thing. I hate our dreadful language and accent. Sorry, guys, that we bastardized it. But anyway, he went and looked at people in therapy who had muscle memory to a degree, but had to relearn how to be a human. And I think that was genius. And that really gets to the heart of the creature, because the idea is that he's not a child with childlike wonder. He has a certain amount of it because he's reborn, like anyone who's reborn. You have a new perspective from your old one, but you still are saddled with history and some kind of memory. And we've never seen the creature. I mean, he learns so quickly. That's not a toddler. That is somebody with a fully formed brain, abnormal or not. So had to throw in another reference. But and then there's Mel Brooks.
Which I have to say, I love. It's just.
Have you seen the play, the staged musical?
I haven't. No,
it is a delight. It is an absolute delight. I actually think I like it better than the movie, but the movie is beautiful. I mean, it is a beautiful homage. And of course, with Bride of Frankie, we're somewhere in between, I think, James Whale and Mel Brooks in our approach and aesthetic.
Yeah. No, it is wonderful. It's interesting you're talking about Cumberbatch's approach. Reminds me of a person. I think it's something that we go through. I had major operation when I was 19, and I had to do something to my hip, and I was involved removing a small part, a piece of bone from my hip, which I really did because they were doing lots of other stuff at the same time. So I wasn't worrying so much about that because there were lots of other things to think about. But I remember the first time I got out of bed, and they asked me to walk, and suddenly realizing my hips felt not my hips, my pelvis felt wrong. And it was just this incredible, it felt as if they put in this concrete, they'd replaced it with concrete. And I remember, I knew my legs worked, but it just felt wrong. And it was being, trying to walk, and I got over it. It only took about half an hour or so before I was walking more or less normally again. But that thing of just like your body is not behaving the way you expect it to. There's something very wrong with the way that your body works. Interesting. Yeah, I can understand how that that would work really well for the creature. Now we kind of glossed over Bride of Frankenstein. Why did you choose this version particularly?
Why did I choose Bride of Frankenstein? As I think it's just such a magical film. All the pieces come together, and I think so many of them are too derivative without being faithful enough. And I feel like this was just a truly original film. I think it was also one of the few that, we have the overtly comedic ones, but it's a true dark comedy. It's got so many layers and levels. Of course, it was, a bunch of the people, the director, the writer, the actor who plays Victor, and obviously Pretorius, were all openly gay. People knew. And this was at a time where that was even less acceptable than it still is now, sadly, but it's getting better. But, and then we have the censors who didn't know what to do with horror, especially interesting horror, because, that Hays Code had such ridiculous terms. That's why we still see those old 50s TV shows with, married couples in separate beds and no lustful kissing or dancing, there were so many rules. And then you look at this movie and you think about what it got away with and what some of the dialogue is suggesting about sexuality, about very subversive subject matter for mainstream cinema in 1935. So I think there's just something really special about these people coming together and trying to, take a usual Hollywood franchise, and they're just trying to crank it out for money, just like we're pretty much back in the studio era now, except it's all, comics. But they did something more. And the idea of that subversion just excites me to no end. And I think it comes out in the screen in a really amazing way. Plus, it's just so beautiful. It's such a beautiful film. The effects were really incredible. We tried to emulate them as best as possible. Like with the homunculi, they had black screen back then instead of green screen because it was in black and white. But they used real life models combined with black screen, and it was a really beautiful blend of CG effect, basically, and practical. So, and the makeup, and of course Boris Karloff. What an icon! There's just so much about it.
It's interesting. You were talking about the effects on the Ernest Thesiger, the actor who plays Pretorius. Apparently, famously used to walk into parties and just shout out, "Anyone for buggery?" And
he's just a delight. I would hang out with him in a heartbeat.
Yeah, he's wonderfully creepy. And I happen to know this particular story because I was watching The Old Dark House, which he gives another remarkable performance. And of course, the connection there is because Charles Lawton was married to Elsa Lanchester, who's got a wonderful look. It's those eyes, but it's also, it's the Jack Pierce makeup for both Boris Karloff and her. She's there at the very beginning of the movie playing Mary Wollstonecraft, Shelley. But the creature, the whole movie is about the creation of the mate rather than the mate is up. The bride literally just has a few moments at the end of the movie. Effectively, it is all about the persuade. Again, it's about, and fully, of course, you said of Victor Frankenstein, he's actually named Henry Frankenstein in the films because they got rid of Henry Clavell and made him combine the two characters together. But I do find it interesting because there is that broken man and the scientific curiosity, and against his better nature, he's persuaded to do this. Well, he's both persuaded and threatened into doing this. I think it's an interesting dilemma. Apart from the homunculus and the homunculi in the bottles, what are your favorite moments? You got a favorite moment in the movie?
Well, oh gosh, the blind man is in Bride and not the original.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
I think, of course it is. I usually watch them together, so sometimes they become a blur because it's such a great progression. But I think that is just a remarkable adaptation because it really captures what was in the original novel, but puts it in a completely new context. And we've got these two outsiders in the world that find this connection. And I think it gets to the crux of the story that really all the creature needs is some connection, some love. Here's in that regard, a child who has been, rejected by the parent and with absolutely no nurturing, we can all get through incredible suffering and incredible challenges in our life, but we can't do it alone. We are pack animals. We need each other. And so to see that moment where they come together, and yes, it's campy and silly, some of it intentional, some of it maybe just because it's dated now, but there's something still really moving and beautiful about it. And especially with the performances, I think that is probably the strongest scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, yeah. Or it's also one of the most tragic. I mean, one of my favorite versions is Frankenstein: The True Story, a made-for-TV version.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's available on available on YouTube. I'm sure I've seen it on YouTube because it's got Michael Sarrazin playing the monster. Playing the creature, and God, hold on. So I'm gonna have to. I'm probably misquoting. Make sure I've got the right names. Frankenstein, the true story. Yeah, Frankenstein, the true story. You must watch this. It's got James Mason. Sorry, Leonard Whiting, David McCallum playing Henry Clerval. James Mason plays John Polidori. You know, completely not the characters, and it's not the Michael Sarrazin as the creature. You know, who starts incredibly beautiful, who starts very, very beautiful, and decays during the course. But it's really interesting. Mason is absolutely wonderful in it, and I swear I saw it on YouTube. And it was a two-parter originally broadcast. But yeah, Frankenstein, the true movie, the made-for-TV. I'll give you the year. It was 1973. It's 3 hours and 5 minutes. So you get a lot. You get a lot in that version of it. I do recommend that.
I will definitely check that one out. I don't know how I missed it.
Yeah.
There's so many though.
Oh yeah, what did you say? If you've seen 18, I've managed to stumble across one you've not had a chance to see. Also, what I love about Bride of Frankenstein, it does create that wonderful line about gods and monsters.
Yes.
Which was used for the biopic.
Which is also great. And in fact, that director is Bill Condon is, I think, on board to do a remake of Bride of Frankenstein. Luckily, it has been postponed. I just hope they don't. They're not going to get it right. They're just not.
What is interesting, I mean, one of the points I wanted, and of course, Gods and Monsters was produced by Clive Barker as well, and Bill Condon directed. I'm going to say Candyman, but I'm probably wrong. But one of the no, that's Michael Rose. But I'm sure it was connected with Clive anyway. But it's interesting. Yeah, why would you remake? But what I find interesting about Bride of Frankenstein is that it's a very good sequel. And apart from Hellbound, which I'm obviously closely connected with, you don't get that many really good sequels. Evil Dead, perhaps.
That's good.
You know.
But interestingly, too, I would argue that the sequels in both those cases, Evil Dead and Frankenstein, take a much more comedic tone than the original. So I think maybe the idea is don't try to recreate exactly what you did the first time, build off of it, but go in an interesting direction, because usually they just become clones of each other. They Frankenstein and Frankenstein and Frankenstein to the point of just, making a big old mess. Yeah. But actually putting together different parts and exploring different ways of looking at the story, I think is what makes it appealing, because we still get the world and the general tone of it. But both of those cases, I love the original and I love the sequel, but I wouldn't even put them in the same category. No,
they're very, very, very different. Yeah. Interesting. Now, the book that you chose was The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White, which only came out this year.
Yeah, I just finished reading it 2 weeks ago, and it is hands down my favorite spin-off of Frankenstein, movies, books, everything alike. I was so blown away by it. And I think one of the reasons is she does what, to an extent, but more literally, I've been trying to do with Bride of Frankie, which I didn't mention is also a proof of concept because we have a feature that goes with it that expands even more on what I wanted to explore from Shelley's book. But this book, Kiersten White did something so remarkable. She clearly got the book. And a lot of times people have questioned me. Most recently at Smith College, I was at their Frankenstein bicentennial, and I co-presented our film, Bride of Frankie, with Edison's Frankenstein, with a Frankenstein scholar. And we were up there, and he challenged me in calling Mary Shelley's book feminist. He's like, well, I don't understand. I mean, the women barely speak in it. They have no power. You know, how is it feminist? I'm like, well, exactly. This is what's fascinating, is that these women have no agency at this time, which is realistic, and why I hate the Branagh Frankenstein movie where he tries to make Elizabeth an equal. I'm like, do you understand that's the opposite of feminism? You're taking away, you know, you're just giving it to her. You can't just give it to her. She didn't have that power. But in the original book, Elizabeth speaks out when she knows in her gut that Justine is innocent. And Victor, who doesn't speak out, who knows with proof that Justine did not kill what's his face, the little boy, William. Yeah. But she's not allowed to speak out. This is a horrible thing. You know, a woman is not allowed to do this. She comes out, risks her own reputation, risks her own position in society, which is already pretty tenable given her orphan status and whatnot. I mean, she is completely dependent on Victor. She belongs to him. Literally, they gave her to him. And the fact that she speaks out against him for social justice, she is a very, very strong character. And every time Justine, too, who through no fault of her own, you know, winds up she confesses to a crime she didn't commit. She comes back later when she realized under duress she did this, and she was fevered at the time. She was in a bad place. But they both come out, they have these incredible speeches. They say these really wise things that if the men had just listened to these women, none of this would have happened, or at least not so bad. So the book, Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, takes what we know about these women and adds a whole new level of it, because now we're seeing it through her perspective as opposed to Victor's. And like I said, he's an unreliable narrator, and we get that. Reading the book, if you pay attention, it's very skewed to his advantage and questionable, except when the creature speaks. And even then, you know, you kind of wonder, because anyone who writes in the first person, of course, you know, they're going to be in their own favor unless they're totally self-deprecating, which of course Victor is not. So she takes everything from the book, and this new story could totally happen within the context of the book if you buy that Victor has lied about a few things. And we see how she negotiates her entire existence, how she goes from being in this poor home where she's abused, being taken in by the Frankensteins, and manipulating Victor to establish her own position just to get by and survive in a society that has no use for her. Things get complicated, but what's lovely is that she also, unlike Victor, takes accountability and has a conscience and tries to take care of the people she loves in her life. And the creature fits in a beautiful way. And it's a completely different portrayal I've ever seen of him. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. I don't want to give anything away because people need to read it. But I was cheering as I read this book, and I was so depressed when it was over because I just want to hang out with the characters forevermore. In fact, if there's some kind of magic way to dive into this book and leave the real world, I'm there.
It's done very, very well. I have to say, I started because I learned about your choice. I haven't had a chance to read it all, so I read some of it, and I've listened to some of it on Audible. I have to say, as an Englishman, the Americanisms disconcerted me. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm only in chapter 1, and also poor editing. As well, it's just like, no, you can't turn up the wick of it. You can't turn up the wick. Sorry, you can't turn up the gas on a wick lamp. you just can't, and it's just think, somebody really should have read this, because I thought, and those things always really, really bug me. I'm that kind of reader. Unless you get that kind of thing absolutely right, you're not going to engage me properly. But it sounds, and listening to you talk about it now, it sounds very interesting. I want to go, and I'll probably read it I probably will read it, but after I've reread the book, because that's rereading Frankenstein is my next book on the list of all the classic, because I'm rereading all the classic ones at the moment. And it is an interesting premise, and the story, and and your thought, the thing you just pointed out about, the fact that she defends Justine in the original book, I'd not really cottoned on to before. That's very true. It's interesting. So, well, thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for it. I'm glad you did. But of course, the other movie we should just mention briefly, if not, is Frankenhooker, which you put as a runner-up choice. And you said it was probably weirdly the most feminist version of Frankenstein. What made you say that?
Well, I was shocked because I was literally watching a Frankenstein movie a day for a while before we made our film. And so those 80 that I watched, I probably have seen more, but I watched 80 within like a 3-month period. And I thought it was going to be total softcore porn. And I guess it kind of almost is, except it really has this wonderful 80s sensibility. And it's fun. I mean, if you like Frank Henenlotter, it's right up there. And I love that kind of thing. But when I was watching, I was just so blown away because even though a lot of the dialogue is very on the nose, the Victor character talks to himself, and he's going on with what's in his head, and he's really debating with the ethical, moral issues and his own narcissism. So he's addressing what Mary Shelley addresses. And then when he still is, a total sexist misogynist who goes around killing hookers and choosing to put these pieces together from these women for all the wrong reasons, he gives the women and all their parts voices. And so again, they just have little small voices. They don't have a lot of agency, but I love how in their circumstances pre-animation or pre-reanimation, wow, that's a mouthful, that they don't really have it. But when they come together as a group of women, kind of like the Women's March and what's happening now, they have this newfound strength. And that really is the case. I mean, there are more women than men in the world. And I love how he brings these women together in one body, one really freakish body. And suddenly they take control and they start making the Victor character and other men in their lives accountable. So I feel like this fits with Mary Shelley's politics, but it also fits with these voices that we have of Justine, of Elizabeth, of the woman in the scene with, I can never remember her name, the girlfriend who comes and joins the family with the blind man.
Oh, I can't remember her name either.
Yeah, I can't remember her name either. But these are all women who have really strong voices and strong backstories and have overcome a lot. So I feel like in that way, Frankenhooker really pays tribute to that in an exciting, albeit unorthodox fashion. And he even brings up interesting stuff about, the crack epidemic and class issues and race issues. So I think Mary Shelley, in a contemporary context, those things should come up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking, oh my God, what would Mary Shelley have made of this? Particularly as I was trying to watch it earlier on and I fell asleep and then I just woke up to exploding hookers. It was like, what? And I say,
Davey, what on earth?
It's just like, I watched the opening. I have to say, one of the funniest things I think is the opening 5 minutes of the movie, which is the discussion between the fiance and her friend at the barbecue as to how she's going to let her Victor operate on her. Well, is he a doctor? No. But he works for the electrical company. this is what madness, what fresh madness is this? And it's brilliant. It really is. It's just kind of like, oh, this is fun. This is great. But as I say, I happened to fall asleep and woke up to exploding hookers, which is just bizarre.
Well, we all have those days.
Yeah, it's just absolutely bizarre as far as I can say. And a wonderful end. You know, it's a wonderful twist, and you know, it's a fun movie. And I've not seen any of his work before.
Oh, go check out the rest. If you like that and have that kind of sense of humor, then all of his stuff is really. He has a lot of heart too.
Yeah,
and I think that's it. Like Frankenstein is a fun book. I mean, it's deep and it's heavy, but it's packed with all sorts of fun stuff. I mean, all the set pieces. Of course, it became a movie again and again and again. It has all of those wonderful spectacles we want in a good story. And I think that's why we keep seeing it repeated. And you know, it didn't occur to me to even include Shape of Water, because even though it's not technically a Frankenstein film, Guillermo del Toro, who sounds like he's as obsessed with Frankenstein as the rest of us, you know, has been wanting to do a Frankenstein movie forever and is just afraid he can't. I'm like, dude, you just did. I think that's one of the greatest Frankenstein stories we've seen in contemporary cinema, or maybe ever.
Interesting. I still haven't watched it yet.
Shame on you. Go see it tonight. Is that good? Well, it's late there, but
yeah. It's one of those things I keep on. I must get round to watching this. Barbie Wilde will never forgive me for not having it, because she just thinks it's absolute work of genius.
Of course she does.
Yeah,
excellent taste.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I will. I am going to sit down and watch Shape of Water, but probably just not in the next week. I've got so many other things I need to get done. Cool. Well, thank you for introducing me to Frankenhooker, because it was an experience I wasn't expecting. But it's beautifully shot. It really, you know, it is very much of his time. I mean, it really knows its target audience incredibly well, you know, and it's just a fun teenage boys movie
that anyone can enjoy. I guess my inner teenage boy enjoys things. I just think I actually think that because it's so female empowering by the end, I wonder, I bet it has as big a female following, if not more. Yeah.
It's no holds barred as well. And as you say, I think the central performance by the guy playing Victor is great as well. He's just got this wonderful look about him, and is, you know, just of a man obsessed with his inventions and creations and so on. But also, I mean, just you know, the opening 5 minutes, coming back to the opening 5 minutes after the conversation between the fiance and her girlfriend, then we go and we cut to the inside, the kitchen, and there he is with a one-eyed brain on the kitchen table. Trying to make the eye follow his hand and doing things, whilst the mother is trying to, just completely oblivious to what's going on around, you know, on the kitchen table, whilst she tries to, and having, it's just like, what is this? It's amazing.
And yeah, you think about the original story, and that's probably somewhat faithful too. I mean, look at what Victor was up to. How did nobody know? I mean, he's like getting all these giant, he says himself, giant body parts. Imagine the smell. I mean, his, you know, apartment neighbors must have some indication that there's some weird crap going on.
Well, I think it was probably a smelly time. They didn't have
that
much.
Is true. It would have been less.
As much sanitation as they have now, you know, it was a smelly time. He possibly got away with it, but it's a very good point. You know, otherwise they'd be wondering about the huge quantities of ice he was ordering in to keep everything fresh. Well, okay. So what else? Now, what you mentioned? You're hoping to get together. You're working on a Bride of Frankie feature film. What else are you working on at the moment?
Well, actually, I thought we were going to aim to try to get Bride of Frankie made now that we're at the end of our festival run, and I have a script and it's won awards and had some interest. But then I reread Carmilla, the 16th century novella, you know, that all the old lesbian vampires, movies from Hammer and so forth were based on. reading that in a Trumpian era was a really fascinating experience, because you've got this immigrant from an Eastern European country coming to a small conservative German town. She beguiles all the teenage girls. They become lesbians, and they're stricken down by disease, a deathly disease. And then ultimately we find out that she comes from a family of monsters who've been targeting young women, you know, for centuries. And reading that now, I'm just like, why do we have to always demonize the immigrant? Why do we have to demonize homosexuality? Why couldn't, you know, the monster be in the town itself, in its history and its blood? And why can't love be the salvation instead of to blame? So my story has nothing to do with vampires, but I set it in rural Ohio. And now it's the daughter of an undocumented Mexican migrant worker who comes to the high school, and things start the way Carmilla does, but they go in a very different direction, and it's really, really a Trump era horror. So, and it's a much lower budget than Bride of Frankie too, which has Amelia Earhart and her plane, and you know, it's actually quite a spectacle. So I've got this lower budget project that I think is so timely and so now. So I have the last few people reading it. I won a free scholarship to a 3-week Tuscan writing retreat a few months back, where I wrote the whole first draft. And so I'm now in the final throes, getting readers, and I'm hoping by January to be out there trying to get funding for it.
Oh, wow.
So
well, fully enough.
My goal is the next 18 months. This will be my first real. I did one other feature, but it was for pocket change and, you know, on SD back in the day. It doesn't quite count. So this is going to be my first official feature, I think.
Okay. Well, that's fascinating. Fully enough, I just finished reading Carmilla 2 nights ago.
Oh, no way. What a coincidence.
Yeah, no, seriously, it's a fascinating story. I was looking at it for another angle, for another project. Something else I'm working on with a particular view of mine. I found it absolutely fascinating. And very interesting. I hadn't looked at it from that angle as well. It's got one of the best descriptions of what it is to be the victim of a vampire I've come across, and what it actually feels like to be the victim of the. And what is interesting is, you know, the denouement. Sorry, spoiler alert for the end of the story. It's, you know, the men come in at the end, and there's a wise figure who knows the whole story and knows what needs to be done.
Exactly.
You know, literally like Dumbledore at the very end, and just sorts everything out for everybody. But it is an interesting story. It's a very interesting. It's worth a read if you've not read Carmilla. I do recommend reading it. You kind of know exactly what's going on, and it spend a lot of time talking about. It's probably too long. It's not that long.
No,
it's not even a novella. It's a long. You know.
Right.
It's probably about 60 pages, something like that. It's not that long, but it's kind of like, it does spend a lot of time talking. You know, there's not a lot of plot for the storytelling.
Exactly. But I think it's sort of like Lovecraft in that sense. There's a sense of dread and atmosphere that is very alluring. And you're right, being under the thrall. And I just read a YA novel. I'm trying to remember the name of it. The Moths Diaries. That was a take on Carmilla. And it's written with a young woman at a sleepaway school, whatever you call it, boarding school. And Carmilla, there's a Carmilla character who comes in and bewitches her best friend and some of the other women. And it was really interesting in a modern context to look at that. In my case, too, there's a disease as well, but it's very much rooted in political reasons in our current society. So I was just looking at all of the problems. Well, no, you couldn't look at all the problems. That would be a movie that would last, 100 hours, but at least. But I was looking at a lot of the problems in our society right now that are holding people back and preventing social justice. And so then I looked in this story, and I just saw all these opportunities. I'm like, oh, this could be explained because of this, and this could be explained because of that. And it all tied into this conservative, neo-Nazi conspiracy that dates back from the beginning of, the pilgrims and whomever coming here. And it has a new horror icon that I'm very excited about that probably resides somewhere between, what's his name? Oh my gosh, Freddy. Between like Freddy and Beetlejuice, but he's a pilgrim.
Oh, okay.
Well, he's a Puritan, not a pilgrim.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that sounds absolutely fascinating. We wish you luck with that.
Well,
okay.
I'll be looking for a British gent to play the role, so we'll have to talk if I get funding.
That sounds very interesting. Yeah, and doable. I'm sure that's doable. Okay, well, thank you so much indeed for joining me.
Well, thank you, and have a great time in Atlanta. It shouldn't be too cold.
Thank you very much. Christmas before, we've just been sorting out Christmas. We've just been sorting out the Christmas menu, the shopping list for all the food. I went out and bought the Christmas pudding and the Christmas cake today to make sure we got those. I know it's 3 weeks away, but you have to be prepared.
You never be too prepared.
You can never be too prepared for Christmas. It's going to be very, very quiet. Next week, before I say goodbye, next week, just let you know that I'm going to be talking with Sarah Daly and Laurie Brewster from Hex Media about their hidden horrors and their new movie, which I pronounce Automata, but Laurie insists is pronounced Automata. So think of that what you will, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, and that will be the last show of 2018. It's amazing how fast these things go. So hopefully a few of you will be able to join us again next week. Devi, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great to catch up.
Good. And enjoy your Christmas as well.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Take care, folks, and hopefully see some of you next week.